Hello, everyone. I'm Dan Liebenson, and I'm here as always with B'nai Lappi for this week's episode of the Oral Talmud. Hey, B'nai.
Hey Dan, how are you?
I'm good. I'm excited to continue our conversation from last week. Like, it was one of those that, like, I felt we were really getting somewhere, and then it was like, wait a second. If we sometimes we go long, but if we went long, we would actually have to cut it short. So
Yeah,
we'll do it again next week. So I'm excited to jump back into this text with you.
me
Um,
too.
So just as a kind of a reminder, we're looking at this text that comes from the tractate Shabbat, page 31a. And it's kind of like that's presented as like these are the questions that you're asked in heaven. You said Ron Wolfson wrote a book. I should have researched that between this week and next or last week
I,
and this
I
week.
I read through it last night
Oh,
again,
exciting.
and
Okay, great.
yeah,
So your citation was accurate. So like why did I think it was Mitch Albom? Anyway, he had something about like questions they ask you when you die, I think also. Anyway, but these are the Jewish sort of, I mean, in a sense, right, the questions that you're asked on Judgment Day. Right. And I mean, do they really believe in that, et cetera? But I mean, if you frame it that way, these are the big questions. These are the critical questions. And just as a reminder, and folks can go back to our conversation from last week to really get into them so we don't have to get into them again. But just as a reminder of the ones that we covered, they were you honest in your business dealings? Did you fix times for Torah study? Did you engage in being fruitful and multiplying? I think we had a rich conversation about what that could mean. Did you count on salvation, or were you kind of really looking forward to salvation?
right,
Uh,
or hopeful about the potential for improvement of ourselves and the world, something like that.
yeah, and by the way, I don't remember. I probably did say this last week, but I don't really remember. But I've been thinking a lot this week about because in part because I had to submit a grant proposal between last week and this week, and a lot of times, when you're writing a grant proposal, like the advice that you get is be optimistic, be positive. And I tend to be negative in a positive way. Like I'm trying to say like, oh, these are all the problems we're facing, and these are all the challenges, and this is why the other approaches aren't quite right, and whatever. But there's a difference between that and a very optimistic framing. And I was kind of what I don't know what's going to happen with this grant proposal, but I was pretty proud that and maybe sort of influenced by our thinking, that I did put it in hopeful terms. I did frame it as, this proposal is about ending up with a Jewish people that's bigger than it's ever been numerically, whereas the typical way of thinking about Jewish grant proposals continuity is like, let's just not lose any Jews. Let's
Right.
try not to lose anyone. But I said, no, what if we were 10 times bigger? Like what would that look like? And numbers aren't everything. And I said, and what if it was 10 times more meaningful to people? And that, so to me, like that's kind of where I actually, as I've been mulling, and kind of working through this point, I'm like, so to the extent that this is saying, did you approach life with optimism? I actually think that's a pretty huge thing. And actually, at least for some people, they really struggle with that. It's people that have kind of a pessimistic frame of mind.
Yeah, you're bringing to mind one of my heroes, Harvey Milk. We
Mm,
used to always say, you got to give him hope.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
You got to give him hope. And I don't think this item in the kind of life curriculum final exam implies not to be critical, right? Not to notice problems, identify. On the contrary, I think this move toward progress and improvement in growth requires um, tochacha, requires naming what's wrong
Yes.
and
Yeah,
fixing.
it's not about, right, it's not about denying what's wrong, but it's about fundamentally approaching with positivity. I don't remember if I said this last week, and if I did, I really apologize. But I was actually talking about it for sort of a totally separate reason on the episode of Judaism Unbound that's going to come out tomorrow. But there's that scene where Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, comes to visit him, and he and it's famous because he puts out this management advice like you should appoint captains of tens and captains of 50s, et cetera, which is huge for me. I think it's really important. But there's a scene before that in the story where Moses says, oh, we've been so hard, we got out of Egypt and it's been so difficult along the way. And Jethro basically says, like, oh my God, you got out of Egypt, like you were slaves and you're free, like what an amazing God you have, like what, you're the God is the best, and he throws a huge party for the elders. And I've always read that as sort of just as much leadership advice or critique of Moses' leadership as the captain's business, that he's saying you have to lead from a place of optimism and hope. And yeah, like Harvey Milk, you got to give him hope, but it doesn't mean that you didn't struggle. And of course you have to take care of the people. Actually, that's one of Moses's downfalls, is that he tends to not realize the pain of the people as much. And Benet, you're frozen, so I don't know if you're actually hearing me. But so he doesn't. I'm going to keep talking because our listeners are there, and hopefully Benet will rejoin us if she has in fact had an internet hiccup. But I'll say that Moses often is kind of someone who isn't paying enough attention to the pain of the people and who gets mad at them and etc. And so that critique by Jethro, or that advice to well, it's not to deny the problems. Oh, that's what I was saying. It's not to deny the problems. It's not to deny the pain of the people. And actually, that would be a fair additional critique of Moses as a leader. Sometimes he's not as attentive to the people's pain, and he's more critical and angry and judgy than he needs to be. So it's not to ignore that. It's to deal with that. But it always from leading with, we're going to get through this. It's going to be okay, right? That's the function of a leader and a person. I mean, we're all leaders in some form of our life. So to me, that's a little bit like, did you lead with hope? So the bottom line is that, as I was saying, that if we think about leading from hope, that's actually something that I think is, I mean, it's interesting to think about it here, because this isn't like the questions that leaders are asked when they die. I mean, this is a question that people are asked when they die. So it is true that leading from a place of hope is critical, but it's interesting to think about what living from a place of hope means.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's just look at the other one before we get to today's one. For anybody that's actually sat through the last 10 minutes, I mean, you are here. So the last one is, did you debate with wisdom, which we talked about last week. So today we are talking about this last question and then sort of what comes after that. So the last question is, did you understand a thing from within a thing? Hevanta davar mitoch davar. So where do you?
Well, I love this one because it also resonates for me with a piece of the definition of svara itself. So elsewhere in the Talmud, Rashi defines what it means to svara your svara. And one of the components of it is precisely this wording of Rava's, which is to understand a thing from within a thing. In other words, and I think it means, although I'm not sure, something about taking what's apparent and digging underneath it to find something that is even more deeply true, that wasn't obvious, and to take what you've got and build something that you don't have, to take what you have and build a future from it. That's completely new, or in the particular way that you're working on. And Rashi makes that explicit, that understanding a thing from within a thing is also about taking this Mishnah, this teaching that you have, and learning out from it something new. And this very text is an example of that, right? We showed that verse in the beginning, and they're learning out a whole new set of values from it. So this is both one of the questions on the life curriculum and the methodology for creating a future built in. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess like that we showed this last week, but I think not completely. So it's useful at this point to like really show that, just to sort of remind that these questions that you're asked on Judgment Day are drawn from this verse in Isaiah, chapter 33, verse 6, where there's a parallelism, right? There's the verse says, "And the faith of your times shall be a strength of salvation, wisdom, and knowledge. The fear of the Lord is his treasure." It's a very hard verse to translate. So this could be one translation. You could translate it in other ways. But the point is that the point here is that there are these key words in this verse: faith, times, strength, salvation, wisdom, and knowledge. And those are being understood to be the five or six, one, two, three, four, five, six questions that, or six topics that you're really asked to judge your life on the basis of. And so each of these questions matches to one of those words in order,
and I would say not only judge your life on the basis of, but live your life.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yes, because if you judge your life on the basis of that, then of course you should have lived your life that way.
Yeah.
And so first of all, that itself is not obvious. That this verse doesn't have anything to do with living your life. I mean, in the most indirect way, you could say the faith of your times shall be, but I mean, it doesn't, I mean, the idea that you should be faithful in your business dealings because it says the faith of your times, like that's clearly not, certainly not a simple surface level meaning of this verse. And most likely, you would have to go very many levels of depth to even approach being able to draw from that, the use of the word faith here, that it means be faithful in your business dealings. So that itself is a understanding of a thing from within a thing. And then if we look at the context of this verse within Isaiah, which we have on the source sheet under it, I have you the whole chapter here just so you can kind of see what it's about, right? But Isaiah, particularly this is a first Isaiah, so this is Isaiah sort of from the late first temple period. And he's kind of saying, like, be careful, if you do bad things, you're going to be exiled from the land and you're going to have all this destruction and everything. And there was a lot of geopolitical stuff going on at that time, and so there was all kinds of geopolitical reasons to be concerned that they might be destroyed. All kinds of other people were getting destroyed all the time by the Assyrians. The northern kingdom had been destroyed, so there's a lot of reason to be concerned. Actually, maybe that's the most significant one, is that they have just witnessed the destruction of their brethren in the northern kingdom, and it's like, you don't want that to happen to you. So there's this, so Isaiah has a lot of those kind of things. And here what this is about is you betrayer, what have you done? The Lord be gracious to us, because we've overlooked you. It's just like we're going to be in trouble, right? All these bad things will happen. And only if faithfulness to your charge is, the land, the Lord has filled. So what it's saying here is that the God is so great, he filled Zion, the land of Israel, with justice and righteousness. Faithfulness. This is a different translation, but it's saying faithfulness to your charge was her wealth, right? The land's wealth. This is a description of the land, and the land of Israel, and it's so great. And if we betray you, God, then the land will be desolate and all kinds of terrible things will happen. So, you could kind of say, like, well, okay, so this is saying, like, a really good thing about the land is that, she was faithful, the land was faithful, and the land was full of wisdom, and whatever. Okay, so you could kind of make some leaps to say, well, these are good qualities or something, and of course, if they're good qualities, you should live your life that way. And if you don't live your life that way, you're going to be judged, just as we are judged for not living up to it here in the land. You can make these kind of connections, but they're not at all straightforward.
Right. It looks like a screaming example of eisegesis, right? Inserting meaning into something that obviously didn't carry that meaning in the first place. And as you're talking, I'm realizing that it's extra interesting that the editor of the Talmud put the verse in. They didn't have to do that. They didn't have to show just how far from the source this new set of values really is. But as I always think about the Talmud, I think it's an instruction manual for how to go from here to there based on how they went from there to here. And they're showing their work, they're showing a methodology.
I love that. Well, I mean, it's interesting. So that would be an interesting PhD dissertation if it already hasn't been done. would be to go through like all the cases in which the Talmud actually quotes a verse from Torah, direct, where the verse is actually included in the text of the Talmud, and to determine is there a difference when it actually quotes the verse in writing versus when it sort of alludes to a verse or doesn't allude directly to a verse or quotes the Mishnah. Is there something going on when it quotes the Torah that is sort of that you can almost like recognize that as a tell or as a sign?
Well, my
It's not the Torah, but the Bible.
yeah, my friend, colleague, teacher, student, partner in crime, Lainey Solomon, is working on a really interesting theory that they noticed, which is that describes what they noticed in the Talmud, which is that the only time it seems that an argument quotes a verse and uses its simple plain meaning, its pshat, is when they say that verse is a kind of distant support, an asmachta. And the only times when the Talmud uses the verse as an actual proof, the verse is being read completely out of its pshat, out of its simple plain meaning. And only then is the verse called Kra, Torah. In other words, it seems that the rabbis are laying down a methodology of radically reading Torah, and only when it's radically reread by us is it actually labeled Torah.
Huh.
And when it's not, it's called asmachta.
That's fascinating. That's fascinating. I mean, it kind of in a way, I mean, just to go back to the point that's being said here, right? Which is that one of the criteria for a good life is, did you understand a thing from within a thing? Meaning, one way we could translate that is, did you read between the lines? Did you dig
deeper? Maybe.
Yeah, dig deeper. Did you reject the plain meaning? So so in a way, it's even a step beyond. Did you sometimes do that? It's like, in other words, it's like if you only read the surface level meaning, it's like you get no merit for that. It's like, it doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. I mean, sometimes it's worthy to do, but don't call that Torah.
That's right.
Like that. Don't. Yeah, that doesn't have a high status. That's really interesting.
That's cool, right?
Yeah, because that's like a level of yeah, I mean, it would just be interesting to like play, what does it look like to play that out, where, again, going back to when we think about what the meaning of this is for us, and we talked way back when we talked about the oven of Achnai, and like Rabbi Eliezer was actually right, in terms of the plain meaning of the law. He was the verse pointer, but it says right here,
Right.
and it's interesting to put, but it says right here, not only in the category of like, yeah, but that's not the end of the story, to like, actually, that's not even part of the story.
And that's not even Torah. We're not even going to call that Torah anymore. That's enormous.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So when Rashi says, so like, okay, so now I want to like think a little bit about something as big as this. Like, sometimes when the traditional commentators, Rashi and others, explain the meaning of something. You in Svara, you have as one of Svara's catchphrases, Rashi is your friend, and but like another piece to think about Rashi is that he comes, I don't know, what, 600-700 years after the Talmud is closed, something like that. What year is Rashi?
11th century.
11th century. So, okay, so 500 years minimum. And like 500 years, that's a really long time. That like America hasn't been settled for 500 years by white people, right? I mean, and I say that very, it's like, in other words, of course, America was settled. That's not my point. My point is just like the history of America that like white people think of, like it hasn't even been 500 years. So
Right.
the whole, so that whole kind of, that's a long time. And so to imagine, so it's kind of like saying that some guy, really smart guy, I mean, let's say a law professor right now, like really knows what each word in the Mayflower Compact means. And like, first of all, we often think like maybe that law professor does know, because we've had, however many years since the Mayflower Compact was, 400, I think, I don't know. That was that we've had written records since then. So it's like there's some like chain of now. In the case of the Talmud, it's more oral. So you got to imagine that some degree of like bandwidth is lost. So look, so what I'm saying is that Rashi might know what these things actually mean, but he might not. And so it's helpful, but it's not dispositive. You can't just say because Rashi says it means this, that's what it means. But the interesting thing is that if Rashi or one of those traditional commentators thinks that the meaning is actually something very radical, like in a way that sometimes makes me more trusting of it because it's a little bit against his interests as a relatively conservative interpreter to interpret that something is so radical. So if he even says it's a radical meaning, then I'm like, well, that seems like a really good piece of evidence that it's actually quite radical. So all that is a wind up to asking you kind of, is it an accepted, is it how you really read Rashi and others that they're really saying like it really is kind of as radical as we've just put it?
Well, first of all, before I get to your question, you brought something to mind as you were talking about if Rashi claims it's radical, he doesn't need to. He doesn't need to kind of stick his neck out. And there's actually a Talmudic concept called amigo. And it's a conclusion that you could draw based on someone's testimony, which without proof, you believe because they could have made a more favorable testimony for their own benefit. For example, if a woman goes to a town, nobody knows her in this new town, she came from somewhere else, and she claims to be a divorcee, but she has no get to prove it.
Mm-hmm.
You believe her. She has it. Well, you say she has amigo because she could have made a better claim about herself. She could have said, I'm a single, unmarried woman, but she didn't. So the fact that she made this less favorable claim is proof that we can believe her, or evidence that we can believe her. So this is sort of a radical amigo. I like that. I like that idea. So, but now to your question. Your question is, go ahead.
So it is like, is Rashi actually saying that this, how radical is Rashi saying this is? In your read?
I think where Rashi uses this concept to define svara, he's for sure, I mean, he explicitly names this is the way you use what you have to take this Mishnah and learn out from it something new. I mean, he says it. So over here, Rashi says, this is what it means to have knowledge.
Well, and in that case, I mean, that might be just a very simple, he's just pointing you to where in which word in the verse this is attaching it to. Because, again, the verse says it should be a strength of salvation, wisdom, and knowledge. So, we had, did you count on salvation? Did you debate with wisdom? Did you understand a thing from within a thing? It's a different word. And Rashi is saying, because in the verse it's da'at, and in the Talmud it's hevanta, which is bina. They're slightly different words. So Rashi's just saying, oh, that's where they're attaching to the knowledge, to the the da'at word. But I mean, if back in the other place his concept is the radical one, like that doesn't have to be. So
but you know what? I think we think it's more radical than they thought. I think we have an overly pietistic notion of the Torah as fixed, as the word of God, and I don't think they did. So I think for us it seems, oh my God, so radical to change the Torah, read it out of its pshat. I don't think they were so precious about Torah and so reluctant to do that. I think that's what you did. That's what it meant to do Torah.
No, and what's interesting is that in secular world, society, whatever, non-Jewish, whatever, we have things today like postmodernism and Derrida. I don't really know what these things are, Foucault, whatever, but I know that they involve reading things very in a kind of free way. And so we have these concepts and we've labeled them postmodern. And because of that, then we imagine they must be alien to a quote pre-modern society. And that's not necessarily the case. I'm right. I mean, it may be that to label that, to have a kind of a consciousness about them may be modern or postmodern, but to use them apparently is not postmodern. It's actually pre-modern. And like you say, they didn't think it was radical. They didn't think it was postmodern. That was like, oh, that's just, we're just reading.
That's
Uh,
right. And for them, that was how you do the tradition. That's how you grow a tradition. That's how you take your received tradition and make it better. That's why, the words after the colon in our name is a traditionally radical yeshiva.
right,
Our hope is to bring back that very traditional, but in our eyes, very radical way of growing Torah,
right.
making it better.
You know, I was I can't remember who it was. Mike Moskowitz. So we were interviewing Mike Moskowitz for an episode of Judaism Unbound, which hasn't aired yet. And so spoiler alert. I think this was in our conversation. He was talking about the famous verse in Leviticus: "A man shouldn't lie with a man, the lyings of a woman." And I've heard various interpretations of that before to try to say that it doesn't mean what you think it means, which is gay sex is a no-no. Steve Greenberg, I remember in his book, talks about, well, no, this is a very specific situation where it's people captured in a war, and you're basically raping them or whatever. There's all kinds of interpretations you could have. And I think that we on this show talked at an earlier point about, like, you don't even need all that. Like, you can just wipe it out of the Torah as the Talmud wipes out other things from the Torah. They just didn't get to that one, or it wasn't, somehow it wasn't, for whatever reason, they didn't care enough or they didn't do it. But that doesn't mean that we can't do it. We have actually just as much. So I'm all on that. I'm all on that train. Absolutely. That said, Mike Moskowitz was talking about this reading that said, well, no, actually, what this verse is trying to say is something very different. That people, what it's saying is, don't cheat on your spouse, and that's what that sort of section is about. And they're saying, if you're married to a woman, don't think that you can have sex with a man and that's not cheating, and I was like, oh, I never heard that one before, and I bring it up only because I'm like one person could hear that and say, that doesn't mean that, it's not, right. It's very plain what it means. We know what this means, and we should read it out of the Torah because it's bad. And that's my position. However, another position could be to say, like, actually, I'm going to now read a davar mitoch davar. I'm gonna sort of dig deep into this, and actually, I'm not even claiming that it's what the original intent was. You don't have to. That's not necessarily what this means. This is where the postmodernism comes in. It's not clear, and it's not clear that it's actually the tradition. It's not clear that it was the pre-modern way to read, to say that we go by original intent. And you say, like, as long as I can read it in a way that it doesn't mean the thing that I don't want it to mean, it's a fair reading. And again, like, I think that that's the plain meaning of the of an Avachnai story, for example, or other ones. It's like, as long as you can read it this way, then you turn to God and you say, sorry, God, you had your chance to clarify this at Sinai and you didn't. Instead, you wrote it in a way that allows us to read into it in a way that, maybe not of your original intent. Tough luck. That's, that was your fault. And we can go on our happy way. So I just sort of bring it up as just one example of like what that kind of looks like, and that this is actually, an ultra-Orthodox rabbi, albeit a very progressive one, and somebody who's, motivated for all kinds of reasons to read these particular texts in that way. But fine. But at the end of the day, like, this is kosher.
Yeah,
Are you
maybe.
not into it?
I'm not so into it because I feel very much like Rabbi Yonatan, who's screaming, wait, what do you mean there's no Ben Surah Moreh? Never was and never will be, this wayward rebellion. I sat at his grave.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's really important to show the legislative history of those things which mean exactly, were meant to say exactly what they look like they're saying,
Uh-huh.
so that we can show that it's legitimate to say, okay, and that no longer meshes with how
Uh-huh.
we understand God and the world. And those we have to leave as sort of monuments to the ability to move forward without them. I don't think davar mitoch davar, to learn how to think from within a thing, should be used on those things. I
Uh-huh.
think it should be a mechanism used to take, some other verse that has to do with, or that we're going to read out equity or equality or non-binary gender, like something that has something
Uh-huh.
to work from to create the positive view. I think that's how davar mitoch davar works,
Okay,
rather
well,
than
I just want to, oh, go ahead. I just want to
no.
posit that I might be in better shape than you on Judgment Day. I just want to say, because
You may. You're gonna get more learn how to think from a thing
yeah, I'm gonna
points.
get a little extra credit on this one. Thanks, Mike Moskowitz. No, but sorry, I cut you off.
No, I think learning a thing from a thing is the positive move of taking not the bad thing and making it a good thing, but taking a thing that isn't really about the bad, but it's going to give you a platform to build the good, right? It's like this verse is about whatever it was, faithfulness. I forget. My analogy from last week was, it was about driving,
Mhm.
and you're reading out from it the importance of drive. Drive is a
Yeah,
value that we must have.
yeah,
I think that's davar mitoch davar. I think
yeah.
that's learning a thing from a thing.
Uh-huh.
And I think that's a tiny bit of a stretch.
Yeah.
Um, I think what Rashi was talking about when he was saying learning a thing from a thing as part of creating newness was really analogizing or growing. I'm not sure.
No, but I mean that whether it's Rashi or not, I mean the idea is like we could conceivably, and right, I mean our job on this show, it's not to resolve the question for people, it's to put the question out into the world. So we could imagine a continuum of what learn a thing from within a thing means. You want to?
Okay, let me give you an example of what I think an example of a thing from within a thing in the tradition is.
Okay.
Okay, so a number of years ago, there was the Supreme Court case in Israel. And the question was whether these two parents who were divorced, who had a child, could force the hospital to do a paternity test on the child, right? The wife was pregnant when they got divorced, and the husband claimed that the child wasn't his. And in Israel, it's not like here. It's not that the spouse is the presumptive parent and has to pay child support regardless of the actual paternity. In Israel, the paternity determines the obligation to pay child support. So they went to the hospital for a tissue typing test, and the hospital refused to do it because the hospital was interested in protecting the legitimacy, meaning the status of the child, and didn't want to reveal the possibility, right? Didn't want the possibility to be revealed that the child had been conceived outside of this marriage union, child of an adulterous union as a mamzer, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
The case went all the way to the Supreme Court. And one of the arguments was that doing a tissue typing test was a violation of this child, who by this point was 7 or 8 years old, of that child's privacy. Okay, because as a minor, the child didn't have say to refuse the test.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the analogy they built this argument on was the Talmudic status of a house in a courtyard. And the idea was that a house you can't have let's see if I've got this right. I hope I've got this right. Windows that face a courtyard in a home because it violates the privacy
Mm-hmm.
of the inhabitants.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, since the window is prohibited in a house, right?
Like if you're building a house next to a house that's already got a courtyard around it, you can't put a window on the side of the house that faces the courtyard. Is that the?
I think that was it. I think that was it. Sorry, I don't have my details right all in a row. But the point was the issue of a house and a window and privacy
Mm-hmm.
was used to build an
Mm-hmm. I
analogy
see. Mm-hmm.
about the permissibility of tissue typing a child for that to determine that child's paternity status, and that it would be prohibited to do so. So obviously the Talmud in our received tradition never talked about tissue typing or paternity tests,
Mm-hmm.
but to use the analogy of a window in a courtyard to build a case for preserving the child's privacy, I think is an example of davar mitoch davar, to learn a thing from within a thing.
Right. So okay. So at the end of the day, though, where I would just sort of leave it at, and I'm sure this is something that we'll return to as we come up with examples, but like that if we look at a continuum, we can imagine that in a way the most like just reasoning by analogy is a kind of low, and I don't mean this as like as a judgment, but I mean it's a low level of radical uh, interpretation of davar mitoch davar, of a thing from within a thing. Reason by analogy. Okay, that's and the so a middle point I think is something like what is done here with the verse, which is sort of taking a verse that doesn't have anything to do with this on its surface and saying we're going to learn from it something completely different. We're going to attach some different thing, and even if it's clear that we're doing that by we've made something up, you could even say there's a certain virtue in nevertheless attaching it to something from Torah that it clearly doesn't mean, that it's virtuous because it's saying you're still connected to the tradition. I feel like that might come to the next point that we're about to read. Um, Others could say it's a betrayal. I mean, what do you mean you're connecting it to some verse that doesn't mean anything like that at all? You're perverting the Torah, and you say, but another point of view is to say, no, we actually approve of that because it shows that connection. It's like the story of Moses in Rabbi Akiva's yeshiva, where he doesn't understand anything that Rabbi Akiva is saying, and we study this right, and then when it says, but it's Torah from Moses at Sinai, he's like, assured that, well, at least the connection to me is still there, even though it's not what I meant. It's not what I, right. And then the most radical version, or not necessarily the most radical, but a even more radical version, is to say that we are going to read the Torah verse to be the opposite of what it actually seems to mean. And I agree with you that introduces the problematic of Rabbi Yonatan, and saying, well, if we're going to do that, we then also have to acknowledge the thousands of years of when this verse was read the more straightforward way, and we can't just kind of say, "Oh, sorry," we would have to then really sit with the pain of the Rabbi Yonatan who's sitting on the grave. But and I don't know that any of us can know what the answer is. I don't think there is an answer. I mean, I think that, but ultimately the question is like, where are you most drawn? I think, but it seems to me like at least a smart person could interpret it in any of those ways.
Yeah. Okay. Let's take a look at this last sort of postscript to the six main questions.
Okay.
And see how this ties in.
Okay. So so did you understand the thing from within the thing? And even if so, if the fear of God is his treasure, which, by the way, I'm not totally sure that exactly the right translation here, even if so, but even if so, if the fear of God is his treasure, yes. If not, no.
Okay, I think even if so means, and even if you got 100 on this test, right? Even if you can answer yes to all of these six questions, there's still one more. It's not it's a condition. Even if you answered yes, if the following condition isn't met, those yeses aren't the kind of yeses that really matter. And we can't really even trust the yeses, or something like that. So even if you said yes, here's something that's going to cancel out all the yeses if your answer is no to it. And what is it? It's a difficult concept. I think for us, if you had a fear of God or awe about God. Okay, so
By the way, just to note that that comes from the verse. So, in other words, that verse ends with something about the fear of God, and so they're saying that's where this is coming from. I mean, or at least coming from. I don't, but I mean, this is where there is a connection to the verse. Just to note that.
I don't know. You want to
Well, I mean, there's
what do you
another
have?
translation thing, which is that the fear of the Lord is yirat Hashem, yirat Adonai, and like yira can be in fear, can be awe, can be reverence. So I mean,
Or a sense of constant awareness.
Or a sense of maybe even you could say humility, right? That it's not you're not going around. I mean, one way to think about it is you're not going around saying like I'm so smart I can interpret anything out of anything, which people can do. I mean, uh, and so I'm living a virtuous life because I can just kind of reason my way to any conclusion that I want. They're saying no, there has to be a certain something that's anchoring you. That's not just your right. So it's
Right.
It could be ethics, could be God, but it could be that could, again, if we want to learn a thing from within the thing there, we might say it's not exactly God as you're thinking. It's not saying that you just have to pray a lot. It's saying that you have to feel like you're doing God's work, or you're somehow you're doing all this, but out of a sense of something, out of a sense. We could debate what that sense is a sense of duty, a sense of obligation, a sense of fear, a sense of, but that there's something I guess I would read it as there's something limiting you. And I would I mean, I'm just thinking about the questions. I mean, like what I was gonna say is like I think of it as like we were talking about these questions as sort of pointing us in the direction of what kind of person are the rabbis trying to form, and right, a person who's ethical in their business dealings, a person who makes sure that they study, a person who's positive, all those things, but so you would think that one way to read this could be, and these are the things that form character, these are the things that form values, but this add-on sort of says, but all this only if you're driven by values, if you're driven by character, a sense of humility. I don't know. I mean, I think there's some interplay between those two halves.
Yeah. One thing that occurs to me is that this Yirat Hashem brings up other ideas in rabbinic literature where there's a status. Oh gosh, how can I say this? There are certain transgressions that are acknowledged to be things that no one can actually know but you and God. And I don't know if my theology matches this kind of a God, but in the imagination of those who did, it's the idea that you can, for example, if you're a customer in a shop and you go and you ask the price of an item you have no intention of buying, right? The rabbis say that's forbidden. And it's one of those things that you're not going to be punished for, because you can easily say, oh, but I intended, only you know what your intent was. I intended to buy it maybe. But that's one of those things that they say God knows inside of your heart. And if you have a sense that God knows, like God's watching, there's that you can't get away with something that you actually could get away with, but in some bigger sense you won't, it is likely to lead you to not try to get away with something because you can't. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it could be that this awareness that you really can't cheat ultimately is also part of the exam, or part of what is likely to lead you to, I don't know. I'm not sure.
Well, one question or one way to cut at this feels to me like, let's talk a little bit about that question. If we were in the position of the rabbis today, if we were trying to declare, here are the 5 or 6 or 7 principles for what a good life looks like, and that's what you're going to be judged on, so to speak. So we don't believe in judgment in the same way, let's say, and so we wouldn't put it in quite those terms. And so we really would probably put it in the terms of like, these are the 7 principles of a good life, and we're going to anchor it in a verse. And now it could be a verse from the Bible, it could be a verse from the Talmud, it could be this verse. Let's play with this verse right now, just for the sake of it's easier, and we're not prepared with a different verse. But I think we could easily come, and the analogous situation would be for us not to use this verse, but to use a different verse that has 7 principles, or 7 words in it, right? And to say, and we're gonna take that to be our 7 principles. And I actually think we probably should do that at a future time, because why be limited? And I don't think they were limited. I think my feeling is they had their 7 principles, or maybe it was 5, maybe it was 6, and they kind of shoved in a 7th because of the verse. But they already knew the principles, and they looked for a verse to attach it to that seemed to have these ideas in it, right? So that would be a lot of work. We don't have time for that right now. If we were looking at this one, I would say, like, for example, right, one of the things that's on my mind a lot these days is climate change. And right, so you might look at this verse and say, or this verse from the Talmud, and say, well, right, the Bible verse actually said it should be a strength for you, right? They interpreted that to be being fruitful and multiplying, which is like peru v'ravu, right? Priya v'rivia. So that's fruitful and multiplying. Those are the words that are used in Genesis. We talked all about that. But what if we said, well, priya is the same root as fruit, and ravia maybe is the same root as rav, like wisdom. So it's like, did you apply your wisdom to fruits, meaning did you really care for the land? I mean, that would be analogous to what they're doing here. And it sounds a little silly when we're doing it, because obviously it doesn't mean that, but obviously it also didn't mean fruitful and multiplying based on the verse from Isaiah. So the question is, so if we're doing things like that, right, at the point is we start doing things like that, and we would come up with a list that's quite different from these, that says, basically, we could interpret each one, we could spend time on each one, but let's say it was on the order of like taking care of the earth, being the value that flows from the be fruitful and multiplying. Then we say, okay, then we get to this last one. And even so, if the fear of God is his treasure, yes. If not, no. It feels to me like there's some kind of limiting, either there's a limiting statement there, or we have to interpret, what do we mean by the fear of God is his treasure in our time, which would be something like, again, this is another thing of the ones that where like I'm sort of fixated on this idea that these days human beings have a lot of the powers that we used to imagine to be the powers of God. And so if we want to talk about the fear of God, that means the careful use of our power, something like that we have to act like God now, and not in the way that we lord it over other people. What I mean by act like God is to have the responsibility of God. So all of these things that we just reinterpreted, yes, but only if we have done so with the mindset that we have the responsibility of God, and we're not doing this to enhance our own power. We're only doing this to enhance our own responsibility. Something like that. That I don't know if that's helpful to you. And
okay, I think this might be an add-on to yours, but what comes up for me is accountability. That this 7th thing is fine for all this, but if you're not accountable to a community, meaning a group of people from whom you are open to critique and challenge, right? So you're going to go off the rails. But if you're accountable, if you do all this and you remain accountable to a community, you'll stay on track. It's a more, we can be more confident that it is actually going to play out for you in a sustainable way. and a way that isn't going to go off. So I think for me, it's something about accountable. But if you're accountable to a community, and if you're accountable to a community, great. But if you're not, none of this is really going to matter, because it actually is inevitably going to fail. You're living those 6 things out, or whatever our 6 things are going to be, is going to fail or go off the rails.
Mm-hmm. I like that. I'm on board with that. I When I look at something like this, and I think, okay, so what's the relevance for us? And also, like, what are we seeing here about the methodologies that the rabbis are using? I'm thinking, like, okay, what we see in terms of the methodology is that they do quote the verse from Isaiah. They didn't have to. They but it's not like the Ben Sora Moreh text where there's like pages and pages of trying to get here. Like, they get here very quickly. So it feels to me like, again, but I floated that hypothesis that the more justifications you find in the Talmud, the more likely they think people are not going to accept this. So they're trying to arm the rabbis with multiple explanations for people. And the more likely that is going to happen is when the people know the opposite, either from that they come to synagogue every week and hear the Torah read, and they know that this isn't in the Torah, or that they just know from like folk wisdom, they have superstitions, they have other reasons for being skeptical of this principle. So I kind of feel like we don't see that here. So it suggests to me that what we're looking at here is something where the expectation is that the rabbis are going to tell the regular people, hey, these are the 7 principles that you're judged on. And the people are going to basically say, oh, okay, yeah, like, fine. And they're quoting the verse to get, the verse is not actually something that they're going to tell the people, but the fact that the verse is quoted here is kind of a more overt wink. So it's more part of the rabbinic training program than about the interaction with the people here, right? And so when we look at all that, I don't know if all that's sort of necessary to my question, but ultimately, like, it makes me look at something like this and say, okay, 2 questions. One, are these 7 principles still good ones? Like, are these good? Like, should we just like keep going with these, or would part of our project today be to declare 7 different principles, or a mixture of those, or maybe both? Like, these are good, these are fine, no objections, but like, what about climate change? What about anti-racism? What about homophobia, transphobia, and all kinds of other things that we care about passionately today that are just not here? And of course, they're not here. They were not top of mind for these people. So we should add supplements. And all of that is in the context of this other question, which is like, right, the predicate of our show, I think, is that if not now, then in the near future, the tradition will be entirely transparent. And so there is at least the possibility that your average Jew will see all the winks, and so it'll be more like the Ben Sora Moreh story, where they do find out about it in the weekly Torah reading. So here they would find out about. So in a world in which they would find out about it, how storifying do we do? In other words, how much do we say, oh, these are the 7 principles, and they're actually flowing from this Talmud, wink, wink, or the Torah, wink, wink? Or do we just say, oh, these are the 7 principles? Because of course we're a society that cares passionately about, anti-racism and anti-homophobia and climate change, right? So like, we don't have to justify that in a verse.
I see, even among the very radical community that allows me to hang with them still, there is this radical community.
The radical community lets you hang with them.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. There is so much power in anchoring.
I agree. Sorry, say what you were going to say.
There's so much power in anchoring our moves to the tradition, and seeing even the seeds of what we're going to make plants being in the tradition. For me, that's a non-negotiable, just because it's so powerful.
I 100% agree. That's my experience. It's like, it's about our and I mean this with honor. It's about our animal nature. It's there's some, I mean, this is what Yuval Noah Harari writes about, and others, that story. We are, at the end of the day, we are still not fully rational beings that are only governed by thoughts, right? We are what we are physically, and human beings, this is a fact, respond to stories more powerfully. And whenever I talk about things that I talk about, and not when I'm doing it, like, again, a grant proposal, or I'm talking about a vision that I have for where we are in Jewish history or whatever. If I anchor it to a story, I often talk about the wandering in the wilderness. If I say, like, this is just like, it moves people. People are like, oh my God, I just got chills when you said that. Whereas when I just say, like, well, let's look at the business theories. This is obvious that we need to do this in a different way. It might be actually more accurate, and actually, from a debating standpoint, a better argument, but it's not nearly as persuasive. But I say that word cautiously, because I'm not trying to persuade and fool people. I'm trying to invite people into a community of, into a chance to really be part of something. And what I find is that what they want is the story.
Yeah, they want to feel that their life is connected to those who came before them.
Mm-hmm.
We really don't want to feel like we're making this shit up. We
Mm-hmm.
we want to feel like we're standing on the shoulders of someone else who stood on the shoulders of someone else, and to know that someday someone will stand on our shoulders, and we are connected to a long tradition of it. That's very meaningful, and I think that's part of that's the takeaway when you do davar mitoch davar, when
Mm-hmm.
you take the little seed and you say that this move we're making to make the world better had early roots, even if tiny. And
Yeah,
yeah.
and I want to just, like, in closing, I just want to, like, share this, like, just one more time, just to see that. So I think, and this is kind of what I'm driving at, that the rabbis who are reading the Talmud, there's another sentence or two between these two, but it's right next to. So it's clearly that this is drawn from that. That's not at all being masked in the Talmud. I just want to say we did skip a little bit here, but the rabbis that are reading this, like, they saw the verse here. They knew that it was being misquoted, quoted out of context, and that the words, that's not really what it wasn't trying to be about the 7 questions you're asked on Judgment Day. They knew that. And nevertheless, I think they were moved to see this connection. Right? They found it moving. So what I'm saying, what I'm trying to say here, is that nobody was being fooled. And yet they found it worthwhile to put the story in. And yes, it's a wink, but it's not a wink because they're going to go up to some average Jew and say, oh, how do we know these 7 principles, or Judgment Day? We get it from the book of Isaiah. I don't think anybody was telling them that. I think that this was for their own internal conversations. And they found it moving to attach it to this verse from Isaiah, even though they knew that it wasn't really from there. And that's what I'm trying to get at here, in terms of imagining a sort of future in which every Jew is effectively a rabbi. It wouldn't be a future in which we would stop telling these stories. We would stop making these winks. These weren't winks to say, hey, we all know what the real truth is, but now you go tell the people without the wink. The wink was for them. That's what the wink was for them, because otherwise it would feel too detached, and they didn't want that. They didn't want just a new system, even if it would be a really good system. They wanted that sense of connection, even if they knew that it was like a false connection. And I think so do we. And so, that shouldn't be left behind in our moving forward, I think.
I love that. I love your emphasis on what the rabbis needed for themselves. That feels very true to me.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Right.
yeah.
Right. Okay, well, we went a little long because of the technical. We'll chop out the technical problem, and and it'll be well. And people will just wonder why your background changed. Um, but we'll be back this time next week, and look forward to seeing you then.
Me too. Thanks, Dan.
Okay, bye, Vinay.
Bye-bye.